When you pray, you're not just saying words into the air. You're stepping into divine conversation. Prayer is not a ritual, it's a transfer of control. It's the moment you stop trying to manage your own clock and start inviting God to manage it for you. Too many of us are frustrated because we've been running on our own timetable. We make plans, we chase goals, we set deadlines, but we never stop to ask the author of time what he has scheduled. Prayer that redeems time begins when you hand the clock back to the Creator. You say, Lord, I've been trying to control the minutes and the moments, but now I'm giving them back to you. When you do that, something supernatural happens. God begins to reorder your steps. What was chaotic starts to find rhythm. What was delayed starts to gain divine direction. You begin to walk in what Scripture calls Kairos time, not just chronological time, but appointed time. That's when the right people show up at the right place, doors open that were once closed, and interruptions become instructions. Because prayer doesn't just manage your day, it moves your destiny. You might be thinking, but I've already lost so much time. The beauty of prayer is that it brings God into your timeline. He doesn't need to rewind the clock. He just redeems what's left of it. When you commit your way to the Lord, you give Him permission to step into your schedule. Psalm 37:5 says, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act." That means you don't have to panic about what didn't happen yesterday or worry about what might happen tomorrow. Prayer positions you in the peace of God's timing. While you're trying to figure it out, God is already working it out. He knows what needs to be delayed, what needs to be accelerated, and what needs to be deleted. And when you pray, He starts aligning your calendar with His kingdom. There's a difference between being busy and being productive. Busy people manage time, prayerful people redeem it. When you pray, God begins to show you what's worth your energy and what's wasting your energy. He cuts away distractions and delays. He shows you where to invest your minutes so they bear eternal fruit. You stop saying, I don't have enough time, because you realize time is no longer your master, it's your servant. Through prayer, you step into divine efficiency. You start accomplishing more with less because God is multiplying what you have surrendered. When you let God control your clock, you begin to experience rest even in the midst of responsibility. You stop feeling rushed because you know you're right where you're supposed to be. That's what it means to redeem time. It's not about doing more. It's about being in sync with God's purpose. Prayer brings that alignment. It replaces anxiety with authority, confusion with clarity, and exhaustion with empowerment. So every time you kneel in prayer, remember this: you are giving God permission to take charge of your time. And when He takes charge, He doesn't just manage minutes. He multiplies meaning. Sometimes in life, what feels like a delay is really a setup for destiny. When you pray, you begin to see that not every pause is punishment, and not every wait is wasted. Prayer aligns you with divine timing. It tunes your heart to the rhythm of heaven so that you move when God moves, speak when He speaks, and act when He acts. Too often, we want God to move according to our calendar, but He's working from eternity's schedule. When you rush ahead of Him, you end up frustrated and fatigued. But when you learn to pray and wait, you discover that God's timing is not only perfect, it's protective. He delays you not to deny you, but to develop you. Prayer has a way of shifting your perspective on time. It teaches you to see waiting not as inactivity, but as preparation. While you are waiting, God is working. He's rearranging circumstances, refining your character, and aligning the right connections so that when the appointed moment arrives, you are ready to receive it. When you pray, your impatience starts turning into expectation. You begin to realize that delay does not mean defeat. It simply means that heaven is still orchestrating the details. There are some blessings that require maturity before manifestation, and prayer is the space where God matures you. Prayer brings your will into agreement with God's will. It quiets the noise of your own plans long enough for you to hear His. You might think you're ready for something, but God knows the full picture. He sees the pieces you can't see. He knows the traps that lie ahead, and through prayer, He protects you from walking into seasons you're not equipped to handle. That's why alignment matters. When you pray, God begins to synchronize your desires with His direction. Suddenly, you stop forcing doors open and start waiting for the ones He unlocks. You stop asking when, God, and start saying, whatever you will, Lord. That's where peace replaces pressure. The alignment prayer brings is not passive, it's powerful. It puts you in position for divine opportunities. You stop missing appointments that were meant for you because prayer places you in the flow of God's favor. Sometimes He holds you back so He can move someone else into place, and sometimes He holds them back so you can catch up. Prayer keeps you in step with those unseen movements of grace. It teaches you to trust that if God hasn't moved yet, it's because the time isn't right. And when it is right, no devil, delay, or distraction can keep it from happening. When you align with divine timing through prayer, you begin to walk in peace even when nothing seems to be happening. You stop panicking about the pace of your progress because you know God is not just concerned about when you get there, but who you are when you arrive. You start to understand that God's delays are often His way of preparing you for destiny. Prayer doesn't just change your situation, it changes your sense of timing. It helps you recognize that every not yet from God carries a greater later. And when you finally reach that moment, you'll realize that waiting in prayer wasn't a setback, it was the setup for everything He promised. Every one of us has moments in life we wish we could rewind, decisions we regret, words we shouldn't have said, opportunities we missed, and seasons we wasted. The enemy loves to remind you of those lost years. He whispers, you can't get that back, you've gone too far, it's too late now. But prayer rewrites the record of regret. When you come before God in sincere prayer, you are not just confessing what went wrong, you are inviting His grace to redeem what was broken. You are opening the door for restoration, not just forgiveness. Prayer gives God permission to step into your past and transform what once caused pain into something that produces purpose. The prophet Joel recorded God's promise, I will restore the years the locusts have eaten. That's not just poetic language, it's divine reality. God can take years of loss and turn them into moments of gain. He can give you back more in one season than you lost in several. But that restoration doesn't begin with activity. It begins with prayer. When you pray, you acknowledge that your own strength can't fix what time has taken. You say, Lord, I can't undo it, but you can redeem it. And the moment you humble yourself in prayer, heaven begins to rewrite your story. Prayer is where guilt loses its grip. The enemy thrives on your silence. As long as you keep your regrets hidden, they grow roots of shame. But when you bring them to God in prayer, He uproots the bitterness and replaces it with blessing. You stop reliving the pain and start receiving His peace. Prayer invites God to show you that even your worst chapters can serve His best purposes. What you see as a stain, He sees as a setup. What you call wasted, He calls useful. God doesn't erase your past, He transforms it into testimony. Through prayer, you begin to understand that redemption is not just about being forgiven for what you did, but being restored to who you were created to be. You may have lost time, but you haven't lost destiny. You may have made mistakes, but you haven't missed your moment. God can use every wrong turn to bring you to the right place. He can take your history and use it to shape your ministry. Prayer makes that exchange possible. When you kneel before Him and say, "Lord, here's what I've done. Here's what I've lost. Here's where I went wrong," He says, "I can work with that." Prayer that redeems time doesn't deny the past. It redefines it. You no longer view your failures as final. You see them as fuel. You begin to walk in a new level of gratitude because you know how far grace has brought you. The same moments that once brought tears now bring testimony. And that's what happens when prayer rewrites the record of regret. It turns what was meant to destroy you into what develops you. Every scar becomes a story of redemption. Every setback becomes a setup for greater purpose. Through prayer, your past doesn't hold you hostage. It becomes the evidence of how mighty your God truly is. There are moments in life that seem ordinary, mundane days filled with routine tasks and predictable patterns. But when prayer enters the picture, ordinary moments can turn into divine miracles. Prayer changes the atmosphere. It invites heaven to participate in the earthly. It takes what seems small and insignificant and turns it into a stage for God's supernatural power. When you pray, you are not just speaking words. You are creating space for God to act. You are acknowledging that human effort has limits, but divine intervention has none. God specializes in stepping into the natural and releasing the supernatural. One sincere prayer can shift an entire season, open a door no man can close, and bring light into the darkest situation. When Joshua prayed, the sun stood still. That wasn't just a historical miracle. It was a revelation of what happens when prayer connects with faith. Joshua didn't have the power to control time, but he had the boldness to ask the God who does. That's what prayer does. It dares to believe that God can interrupt the ordinary flow of time to fulfill His extraordinary plan. The same God who paused the sun can pause your storm, halt your decline, and turn around what seemed irreversible. Prayer that redeems time is prayer that believes God can compress what should take years into days. He can accelerate progress and turn a single moment of faith into a lifetime of impact. The truth is, God doesn't need a lot of time to do a lot of work. We think in terms of process, but God moves in purpose. One encounter, one decision, one prayer can release a chain reaction of divine outcomes. That's why prayer matters. It gives God permission to operate outside of your logic. While you see only limitations, He sees opportunity. He doesn't ask, "How long has it been broken?" He asks, "Will you trust me to fix it?" Prayer positions you to say yes to that question. It makes you a vessel through which God can display His glory. Miracles often show up disguised as ordinary days, but prayer opens your eyes to see the extraordinary within them. Prayer that turns moments into miracles doesn't always change your surroundings immediately, but it always changes your sensitivity. You start to notice divine patterns where others see coincidence. You begin to discern that interruptions might be God's invitations. The phone call you didn't plan, the delay you didn't want, the encounter you didn't expect. Prayer teaches you to recognize these as divine appointments. It keeps your heart ready and your spirit alert, knowing that God can step in at any time. Because when God shows up, time itself bends to His will. When you live a life of prayer, you stop underestimating what one moment with God can do. You realize that He doesn't need a long explanation. He just needs your expectation. A whisper can move a mountain if it's backed by faith. The miracle isn't in the length of your prayer, but in the depth of your belief. God can take one moment of surrender and turn it into a lifetime of testimony. And when that happens, you'll know beyond a shadow of doubt that it wasn't luck, coincidence, or chance. It was the power of prayer turning a moment into a miracle. Life has a way of pulling us in 1,000 directions at once. Responsibilities, distractions, opportunities, and pressures all compete for our attention. Before long, you can feel like time is controlling you instead of you controlling it. That's why prayer is essential. It brings focus where there was confusion and order where there was overload. Prayer doesn't simply help you manage your time better. It teaches you what truly matters. It gives you divine perspective on what to pursue and what to put aside. Through prayer, you begin to prioritize not by preference, but by purpose. You start asking, Lord, what do you want me to focus on today? Instead of, what do I feel like doing today? When you pray, the Holy Spirit begins to rearrange your priorities. Things that once seemed urgent lose their grip, and things that once seemed small become significant. You realize that not everything good is God's assignment for you. There are tasks that drain you, and there are ones that define you. Prayer gives you discernment to tell the difference. It helps you distinguish between what's merely productive and what's truly purposeful. That's how prayer redeems time. It stops you from wasting energy on things that don't carry eternal weight. When your time is surrendered to God, your schedule starts reflecting His strategy. You don't just fill your day, you fulfill your destiny. Prayer gives clarity to cluttered lives. You might have plans, goals, and dreams, but without direction, they become distractions. Prayer brings direction. It doesn't add more to your plate. It shows you what can come off of it. God never called you to do everything. He called you to do what He assigned to you. When you pray, you give Him permission to prune your priorities, and pruning, though uncomfortable, produces fruit. Sometimes He will remove opportunities that look appealing because they aren't aligned with your calling. Other times, He will delay something good to make room for something great. Prayer helps you see that less is sometimes more when it's led by God. You'll notice that when you start each day with prayer, you make decisions with greater peace. The chaos around you doesn't dictate your choices because you've already settled them before God. Prayer creates rhythm. It gives you flow. Instead of reacting to life, you start responding with grace. You begin to see divine timing even in daily tasks. The meetings, conversations, and moments that once felt routine start carrying purpose because they've been prayed over. Your day stops being about surviving the hours and starts being about stewarding them. Prayer also gives you strength to say no. Many people lose time not because of sin, but because of overcommitment. When you're not clear on what God wants, you say yes to everything and end up burned out. Prayer gives you the confidence to decline what doesn't align. It teaches you that obedience is better than busyness. The goal isn't to do more, it's to do what matters most. When you pray, you'll find yourself doing less, yet achieving more because what you're doing is blessed. That's the power of prayer. It doesn't just organize your day, it orders your destiny. When you begin to live a life of prayer, something powerful happens. Time stops being your enemy and starts becoming your servant. Instead of feeling like the clock is always running against you, you discover that it's working for you. Prayer connects your minutes to God's mission. It transforms how you see your days, your work, and even your waiting. You realize that every second can carry eternal significance when it's surrendered to the will of God. Prayer shifts you from simply existing in time to partnering with the God who created it. It gives you the ability to live intentionally, to move with purpose, and to find meaning in every moment. When you pray, God helps you see time differently. You no longer view it as something to survive, but as something to steward. Every moment becomes an opportunity to fulfill purpose. You start recognizing divine patterns, how God places people in your path, how delays serve your development, and how even disappointments are part of a bigger plan. Prayer aligns your daily schedule with divine strategy. It reminds you that you're not here by accident, you're here on assignment. You stop counting the hours and start making the hours count. The more you pray, the more your life starts flowing in sync with God's purpose, and the more peace you find in the process. Many people waste time chasing what God never intended for them to pursue. They move fast but accomplish little because their direction is off. Prayer corrects that. It fine-tunes your internal compass so you walk where God is walking. Instead of asking Him to bless your plans, you begin to ask Him to reveal His. That's when everything changes. Time becomes fruitful because it's no longer filled with random activity, but with intentional obedience. You might be doing less on paper, but what you're doing carries more weight in eternity. Prayer redeems your schedule by making sure it serves your purpose. Prayer also gives you grace for the seasons you're in. There are moments when you feel like nothing is happening, when progress seems slow and prayers seem unanswered. But when your time is submitted to God, you learn to rest in His pace. He reminds you that timing is as important as purpose. A seed planted in the wrong season won't survive, but planted in the right time, it will flourish. Prayer helps you trust that God knows both the seed and the season. You stop striving to make things happen and start trusting that they will happen when He says so. That trust redeems wasted energy, anxiety, and impatience. As prayer deepens, your life starts bearing eternal fruit. You realize that redeemed time isn't about having more of it, it's about making it matter. You begin to invest your days in what will outlast you: people, purpose, and God's presence. You understand that every moment spent in obedience echoes in eternity. Prayer gives time meaning beyond the clock. It gives it destiny. And when your purpose and your prayer align, you walk in a divine rhythm where every second, every task, and every encounter carries the fingerprint of heaven. That's when time itself bows to eternity,